So, so welcome to all of you again for this is the fifth in our series. So in years to come, someone will be able to tell the order by seeing my hair length week by week until this week when I've had a haircut, and hopefully some of you are also beginning to enjoy some of the loosening of restrictions in lockdown. So the title of today's webinar is The Bible in the Ashmolean. So the Ashmolean Museum is our Oxford local museum here in Oxford, and I've been doing this series because while museums have been closed due to lockdown in the UK, this is a way of getting the artifacts out to all of you and into even your living rooms. There have been a couple of real encouragements I've had from these webinars so far. A chat with someone from another worldview just last week, and he commented, he said, oh, I was watching your one on the Assyrians, and he said, I think you're too concerned about the truth, James. I think the key thing is the meaning of all our respective religions. And I said, well, you know, with respect, I'm not totally sure about that. And I think if you think about it, you probably also, there are certain truths that are very important to you about the founder of your religion, about whether Jesus died on the cross, or there's all sorts of things that really count if they happened or not. There was another person who was watching one of our webinars who was in one of the parks in Oxford a couple of weeks ago, and there's a bunch of youths there, and they said, oh, are you a policewoman? She said, no, I'm a Christian. And then they said, oh, your religion's been changed quite a lot, and the Bible has. And she said, no, it hasn't. I've just been listening to some webinars on that. And no, we've got a whole Bible from about 250 years before, Muhammad was born. And so it's really encouraging hearing the use that some of you have been putting.
Can you see?
Putting these things too.
Right.
Sorry. So you can mute yourselves. That would be great. Here we are. Mute all. There we are. Now done. So sorry. Hopefully. So the just a reminder, the purpose of the tours when I've done them has been the ones in British Museum and Ashmolean Museum talk about three purposes. So one is to help confirm the reliability of the Bible. Second is to shed some light and give some colour to the Bible, make it come to life more. And the third is to help preachers and teachers hopefully make things more enjoyable for their hearers. And I hope that we're going to achieve something in all three of those areas tonight. The programme will be sort of in the form of a meze style meal rather than 3 courses. So as with previous weeks, there'll be 10 little slots, which is more like what happens in the tour context, and we'll go around 10 exhibits in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. This is just a fraction of what's on display there, and it's been quite convenient because of the topics of some of the other tours or webinars that I'm doing in this series. I've moved some of the items out from my standard tour, and they're appearing in the other webinars. So I'm doing things tonight which I'm not going to be covering elsewhere. So here we go. I'm going to start with a picture of the, here we are. So here we are. So first of all, this is the Ashmolean Museum here. You'll remember last week we talked about John Wesley. Interestingly, the Ashmolean Museum, when it began, it's the oldest public museum in England. When it began, it was 1683, so it has already been there for 50 years when John Wesley was a student in Oxford. So it's somewhere that he could easily have visited and very likely did visit. And it was going to be another probably 30 years or so after he left Oxford before the British Museum was to open, to give it some context. So the title is The Bible in the Ashmolean, and you can see there are 5 subcategories that we're going to go through and group our 10 objects into. The first object may be something of a surprise. sometimes you'll be familiar with this. If someone says stand up, the implication is that the person who's being instructed is sitting down. And similarly with the Bible, when you've got lots of injunctions against idolatry in the Old Testament from the major or minor prophets, you can safely conclude that there was a problem with idolatry, not among the Gentile nations, but among the Israelites themselves and the Judeans. And that's been borne out by the number of fertility symbols and little gods and goddess figurines that have been found in Judea during the period of Solomon's temple. So if this is a little bit shocking for you, this is just a reminder that in Ephraim Stern's words, the attempts of Judah to be successful in monotheism, they weren't 100% successful. So here's some of these figures, clearly sexualized objects. Something like 820 have been found from this period. And in case you think, oh, well, they wouldn't be anywhere around the temple. The temple was surely where Jehovah was worshipped, and that would be a place of purity, and it's where the Levites were. I'm afraid not. About 400 turn up around the temple. So it's a challenge, you know, that's disappointing, but it does make you think. Sometimes we think that, oh, the Israel was a bit like, you know, Victorian England, everyone was a Christian or went to church, something like this. At least externally, they were all faithful. They weren't even externally faithful. I mean, they were, so it's not a simple picture of everyone, you know, going along with what the Torah said at all. And now, why is this relevant? It was relevant because we always tend to think that it's harder for us, don't we? If you remember last week, John Wesley definitely didn't regard faithful Christians as being in the majority, quite the reverse. And you know, look in the Old Testament, you've got the ratio of 400 to 1 for the prophets of Baal to Elijah on Mount Carmel, the broad road, narrow road feature. So I think we need to realize and get used to the fact that, you know, we're really not going to be in the majority. And it should be encouraging, I hope, for us, thinking of the minor prophets whose legacy we've got. We don't have their writings because they represented the dominant view at all. It was the opposite, but they were faithful in standing up and speaking truth to their own, you know, to the environment they found themselves in. Now, the second item we're going to look at today is quite exciting. It's from 475 BC, so during the period when the Persians were the sort of world superpower. But actually, this object isn't from Persia or from Israel. It's from Elephantine, so which is an island in the River Nile, where there was a Jewish community. Probably the remnants of an outpost when Josiah was sort of an ally of the pharaohs of Egypt against attacks coming from the south. So, but Elephantine had this Jewish community. They even had a little temple, which is a story all of its own. But there was an amazing system for sending messages up and down the River Nile, and it's a bit like sending text messages or SMS or WhatsApp things now, little messages traveling up, back and down the river with a minimum of formality being carried by the ferryman. And then the ones that we've found are all on Elephantine. But if I can give you a flavor, here's one of these little messages going up and down the river, written on bits of pottery. Send me some salt right away. So quite bossy. Red exclamation mark on that one. If there isn't any in the house, then buy some from the ferryman at Elephantine. So that gives you a flavor. And the one that we're going to look at in a minute says this: to Hoshea, greetings. Take care of the children until Ahutab gets there. Sort of school gate type of conversation. Don't trust anyone else with them. If you have flour, make a small portion of dough to last until their mother gets there. Let me know when you'll be celebrating Passover. Tell me how the baby is doing. So we're now going to look at this lovely little object. So here we are. So that is, the language is Aramaic. That's the language of Jesus. It was the lingua franca during the period of the Persian Empire. So being Aramaic, that's the same. Can you think of some other Aramaic in the Gospels? Probably a few things, and you're probably mouthing them now. So Talitha Kum, little girl, get up. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. Ekvatha, which means, you know, be opened. Abba, Father. So this is Aramaic. And what you're looking at there is a bit of broken pottery. The technical term for that is a potsherd, or an ostrakon, plural ostraka. So, and this was early recycling. So instead of, when you broke up pottery, instead of just sort of swearing and putting it in the black bin liner, you'd leave it up in a pile in the corner and you'd pick it up like scrap paper to write on, because paper wasn't yet as common in circulation as bits of broken pottery. And on that writing there is one of the earliest ever references to the Passover, if not the earliest references to the word Passover, which is really exciting. 475 BC, just written on this potsherd. Now, while we're looking at this, it may just be worth thinking as well about the word potsherd in the Bible, because you might have seen that and not know what exactly we were talking about. Well, now you can see one. Now, where do these occur? Potsherds. Well, I think there's somewhere in Isaiah where it says, or Jeremiah says, that you're nothing but a potsherd among potsherds. In other words, you know, do you want to know how important you are as a human being? Take a look in the corner of the kitchen among all the you're just like one of those broken bits of pottery. You might be bigger or sharper or whatever, but you're still just a broken bit of pottery, which is a good humbling place. So hopefully this image will remind you now, or explain what that passage means. And another place, of course, is in the book of Job, where we read that Job scraped himself with a potsherd. Now, I have to say, I mean, if you had a really bad itch, I mean, that would give you a real bit of a, I mean, you could give it a really good scratch with that bit of pottery. Probably draw blood, but that gives you some idea of what a potsherd is. And that's part of the purpose of these webinars, is to bring to life some things that you're reading in the Bible. Now we're going to jump ahead, and we're coming into the New Testament, and here we can see this is a bust of a couple in the Ashmolean. It's a lovely welcome to the gallery, which has the first century objects in, and the cast gallery, which I think Sue will be familiar with, is just behind it, as she knows. Now, you can be forgiven for not knowing which is the man and which is the woman here. Yeah, although I think one's got more of the woman's headdress on. So this is a Gentile doctor, Roman doctor, from 100 AD. And of course, who does that bring to mind for readers of the New Testament? Well, the only Gentile contributor to the New Testament, and indeed the whole Bible, Luke, who's described as being the doctor. So this doesn't really prove anything. This is just a nice welcome to the New Testament. And the next few slides are going to be about the New Testament. So here we are. Here we have a sobering picture of some Roman military nails. About 1 million of these were found in Perthshire in Scotland. That's where these come from. They're first century, but they're sobering, aren't they? These are just irregular nails, and of course for Christians this has special poignance because of the cross of Jesus. The next item we're going to go on to look and see, I think the next one's going to come up, is going to be a gold coin. Now this is from the time of Vespasian. You remember a few weeks ago we did a series on the manuscripts, and introduced you to Qumran and to the Jewish War from 66 to 73 AD, when it's believed that the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden in caves. Now, AD 70 was when the temple in Jerusalem and Jerusalem itself were destroyed after a long siege by the Romans. Amazingly, the Romans had to commit more troops to bringing the city of Jerusalem and Judea to heel than it took them to conquer the whole of Britain. I mean, this was a huge undertaking, and as a result, there were a lot of extremely angry Roman soldiers at the end of a really grueling campaign with lots of huge bloodshed, and they needed paying. Now, the temple was for Israel was the bank. I mean, everybody deposited their gold there, and lots of gifts there, and the coin we're just about to see is made with gold from the temple. And this coin, we've just seen I mean, that potsherd is 25 centuries old. This coin we're going to look at now is literally is gold from the temple, Jewish gold, and is minted in 70 AD. I've got the order right here. Here we are. You can see it looks more like perhaps a prop in a rugby team than he looks like a Roman emperor, but that's Vespasian, and you can see around the edge there, around the left-hand side, from top to bottom, Caesar Augustus, and then on the right, Imp for Imperator, the emperor, Vespa for Vespasian, and on the back of the coin it says the justice of the emperor, Justitia Imp. And this very coin was dug out of the ground in 1850 in a field in Oxfordshire, and it's now in the museum. So extraordinary link between Jerusalem and Oxford. In fact, the majority of these gold coins with Vespasian on, he was the emperor at the time at 70 AD. His son Titus was the general who oversaw the conquest. The majority of these gold coins have turned up in Britain, and that's most likely because there were problems with a revolt led by a certain Boadicea or Boudica in the 60s AD, not the 1960s, but the 60s. And so it seems likely that a lot of the soldiers, or a fair few number of the soldiers, having been campaigning in Israel, were then dispatched and came to Britain. That seems the most likely explanation. And that coin, by the way, was worth about a month's wages for a Roman soldier. So is that in the Bible? Well, it's predicted in the Bible. Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple in Luke and Matthew, certainly. Now, the next thing we're going to move on to is here we. Oh no. Oh, here we are. Now let me stop sharing this for a minute because I don't want to spoil the fun. Right. So the next slide. This is something, by the way, even if you've been on one of the Ashmolean tours before, and some of you have, you won't have seen this because it's on a stairway, and we don't normally, it's not high enough up the priority, but because of other things I've cut out, I'm excited to be able to talk about this. So CVs, curriculum vitae, you think that'd be a Roman word they used, but apparently no, it was the cursus honorum, or the sort of the progress of your successes. Was what in Rome what you wanted to do, and if you were a notable person, you would accumulate awards, achievements, years, military successes. I was made a praetor in this year, an aedile this year, a tribune in this year. If you reached the very top, I became a consul in such and such a year. I was involved in this military campaign, won these awards, and that was a successful person. So if you translate that to the Roman world generally, that was what people wanted to be successful. Now in Corinth, they especially wanted people to be like that. And that's important to realize as the background for the books of 1 and 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians, Paul is having to defend his ministry. In particular, they're saying, you're not successful enough. You don't have as many of this, that, and the other as other people do. And you could tell they were getting sucked into this cursus honorum system. And Paul deliberately turns this on its head, and an extraordinary flight of rhetoric manages to demonstrate that rhetoric isn't that important. And it's a marvelous passage in 2 Corinthians 11. I'm going to read a little bit from it here. Instead of going through all his achievements, he says, whatever else dares to boast of, I'm a Hebrew. 5 times I received, the lashes. I was beaten 3 nights here. And the conclusion always confused me. This is Paul's defense of his ministry. This is the conclusion. If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, he who is blessed forever, knows that I'm not lying. We're building up to a conclusion here. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas was guarding the city of Damascus. Yes, Paul, we're waiting. In order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. That's the sort of the conclusion. I've always got puzzled. That didn't seem to be quite as dangerous as some of the other things he's mentioned elsewhere. It's like, well, that's not more painful than, or more shameful even than being shipwrecked or beaten up or something like this. So what exactly is the big deal, and why this oath? And I promise you I'm not swearing. Well, it's because of a particular Roman award, the Corona Moralis. And I'm going to look at this now. This isn't some distant relation of our current friendly virus. Here we are, the Corona Moralis. Corona just means a crown. The crown of the walls. And this particular inscription refers to a governor of North Africa, Publius Bessius Betuanius, and it lists all of his awards. And one of them is the Corona Moralis, the crown of the walls. And you can just see on the screen, the C isn't very clear, but you can see the Arona, the Corona Moralis. That's his award, and it's been presented by the Emperor Trajan in this Dacian War in the Balkans. Mural crown. Now, what was the mural crown? Well, the mural crown was a military award, like a VC or DSO or something, and that was awarded to the first soldier over the wall of an enemy city. Now, in the heat of the battle, you often couldn't tell who was first over, and so there was sometimes, as part of the awards process, you would have to make a deposition, swear an oath, saying that you were the first over the wall. Now, can you see how this is a parody? Because Paul is building up and he's doing this oath at the end. I tell you the truth, I'm not lying. I'm swearing by God, blessed be his name forever. This is what happened. And instead of building up to getting over the wall, he says, I was let down in a basket. And his hearers, we believe at this point, would have been laughing out loud because they knew exactly what he was doing all the way through. Tom Wright says this, Tom Wright, the theologian, says this: the climax of this chapter is a glorious parody of this whole world of imperial boasting, achievements, going over the wall and everything else. Paul boasts of all the wrong things. And as the climax of it all, I declare on oath that when the going got tough, I was the first on over the wall running away. So I love that, and I hope that'll remind you when you read that passage again just what it's all about, and Paul's skill with his rhetoric. Now, our next slide, also New Testament, but moving on, well, just beyond it, is again Trajan. Trajan, you remember, gave that award in the last slide. That's some lettering from an inscription on a gate, I think built by his son. I think it was his son Hadrian, in somewhere in Asia Minor. But that's the name Trajan. And this is the point in the tour where I talk about this correspondence between Pliny and the emperor. Pliny was the governor of Bithynia. He was somebody who didn't do very much without getting approval and consent, seems to perhaps lacked initiative. Anyway, he wrote a letter in AD 112, and his trouble was he couldn't work out what to do with these Christians. And it's interesting because Trajan's reply, when it comes, indicates there is no settled policy before that time that they could refer to. So this is sort of a new situation. Now, remember, this is 80 years after this, rogue character, John the Baptist, has appeared, announcing the way for Jesus, who is then a Jew, who is killed, and some of his followers claim has risen from the dead. Okay, well, that's that. What you don't expect is about 80 years later for there to be people in the countryside in Asia Minor, hundreds of miles away, who are gathering together to worship Christ as a god. It's just, how on earth could this happen? It can't have happened. Well, here we've got a letter, and I remember this letter, we had it in Latin in a class I had at school. We had to translate it, and I was very excited when I got to see it. And I'll just quote a bit more from it here. Pliny tortured some of these Christians he'd found. He said it was just to make sure they were doubly sure they were telling the truth. And this is what he reported to Trajan. They were in the habit of meeting on a certain day, fixed day, Sunday, before sunrise, so no 11 a.m. services for them, and reciting a hymn to Christ as God. This isn't the belief that Jesus was somehow more than just a prophet, isn't something that comes in the Middle Ages or that came after during the period of Constantine, as the Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code would have us believe. That's just bogus. I mean, that's fake. So here we can see 112, there are people worshipping Christ as God out in the Bithynian countryside. We know it's the countryside because listen to this. After this, it was their custom to separate, then meet again to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. So rumors of, blood and body had been spreading, being eaten. Many of every age, that's great, old and young, every class, isn't that encouraging? And both sexes are being accused. Nor has this contagious superstition spread through the cities only, but also through the villages and the countryside. That is extraordinary, how the penetration of the gospel being spread by the early Christians. I think that's the last of our New Testament passages, but we're going to talk now a little bit about how Christianity came to England before looking at our next slide. Basically, nobody knows the first Christians who came to England. It's probably not the case that Joseph of Arimathea came at some point. Various legends about that coming to Glastonbury. But so in terms of fixed points, in 314 AD, we know that there were 3 bishops sent to a conference, church conference at Arles in southern France, because their expenses were paid by the conference. So 3 bishops. So if there's 3, how many bishops were there? I don't know, 100, 50. And if there's that many bishops in England, how many, church members were there? We're not sure. So that's an early fixed point. But after that period, the Saxons came and invaded. The Romans left 410 AD, and then we had 597 Augustine arriving in Thanet, and we had the Celtic Christians from the north, and the 314 bishops, of course, would have been Celtic Christians. Then Alfred emerges as very much a Christian ruler, and he models himself after Christian or after biblical characters and kings. He's the only king, I believe, in this country to have the suffix "the Great," and he was a traveller. He was a military leader. He went to Rome when he was 4 to meet the Pope, but he also had a passion for the people in his country and for them to know the ways of God. And he showed this in several ways. He asked for more preachers and teachers to come from France to support the church in in Wessex, where he was. He sent them wolfhounds and asked for them to send wolfhounds to guard the flock of England. And we're going to look at now the most famous object to come from Alfred's archaeological object to come from Alfred's reign. It's in the Ashmolean Museum. It's known as the Alfred Jewel. Alfred was born in Oxfordshire in Wantage at a time it's better or worse without, certainly better without it. So born at Wantage, before Oxford was a name on the map. He was born there, and you can just see the word Alfred or Aelfred, A-E-L-F-R-E-D, around the edge of this beautiful item. This is actually bigger on, certainly it's bigger on my screen than I think it is in real life. It's possibly only about 2 inches or so long, and effectively it would be the head of a pointer is most likely the explanation, which would have been used to help with reading. The wording all the way around the edge says, "Alfred made me." It's the most famous object, as I said, to come from Alfred's reign. And it's likely that this was circulated with copies of a book by the Pope Gregory the Great, a book called On Pastoral Care, which you can look up online. So I've done that. It's a good reminder of the responsibilities of leadership. Not everyone should presume to be a teacher. And Alfred circulated copies of this work to the bishops around his realm, possibly with pointers like this accompanying it. So the reason why Alfred was doing this was because from reading his Bible, he could see that there was a correlation in the Old Testament that, you know, when the people were sinning and far from God, God sent invaders, and Alfred was surrounded by invaders. He had Danes and Vikings there, and he believed this wasn't just, you know, a sort of geopolitical sort of migration event happening. He believed this was a theological thing that was happening, and that they would win more battles if his people turned back to God. But he said, how can they turn to God if they don't know what the Bible says, which is in Latin? And so half a millennium, so 5 centuries before John Wycliffe, who's known as the Morning Star of the Reformation, 500 years earlier, Alfred starts translating the Bible into the language of the Anglo-Saxon people. This is remarkable, and it's not a very well known fact. But I've got a quote here. This is from his commentary to Psalm 13, which he'd written out in English. And by the way, it's probably a good idea to read Psalm 13 after this. This is what he said in his comment. When David sang this 13th Psalm, he lamented to the Lord that in his time there should be so little faith and so little wisdom should be found in the world. And so does every just man who sings it now. He laments the same thing in his own time. And so did Christ with respect to the Jews, and Hezekiah with respect to the Assyrians. So a marvelous reminder of the heart that lies behind the translation of the Bible. Next item reminds us of the social impact of the Bible. There's a few items here commemorating the abolition of slavery. I'm afraid the picture isn't great. There's a Bible verse. It'd be great if we had Bible verses on our coins again now, but I don't suppose that's going to happen anytime soon. The object on the right, slightly strangely, is a biscuit. So strange there should be a biscuit that's old, but they baked a biscuit to commemorate the abolition of slavery. That's a reminder of the place the Bible had in the abolition of slavery. And our last item is this lovely picture from 1854 of the Bund in Shanghai. Obviously, Shanghai looks very different nowadays. And amazingly, right front and center, at least in my picture, is a Union Jack. Those 2 individuals, they seem to have managed to lose their oars and their sails and everything else, but at least they've got the Union flag flying. Why have I got this here? Well, this is a reminder, lastly, of the global reach of the Bible. Extraordinarily, nowadays, there are something like, I was reading an article in the Financial Times this morning about this, there are currently at least 100 million Christians in China, the Financial Times article says. And get this, that is greater than the 86.7 million members of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, that is just extraordinary. By 2030, it's believed that there'll be more Christians in China than any other country in the world. Currently, it's US and Brazil, but that'll be China. That is extraordinary. And a lot of this, the building blocks began with this man, Hudson Taylor, a Yorkshireman, who arrived around the time this picture was painted in 1854, arrived in March 1854 with the task of preaching the gospel in the interior part of China. So that's a remarkable place to, I think, end our survey of the Bible in the Ashmolean, with it reaching, far, far, far away from its beginnings there in the land of Israel. I've got some concluding remarks. So first of all, I would encourage you or invite anyone who'd like to come to Oxford sometime and to visit the Ashmolean and do the full tour. There will be a chance for discussion after this for those who can stay around. Just a reminder of the 10 points we've looked at today. Those are here. So just a quick reminder there. So I'll email out a link to this recording afterwards. And lastly, next week, I'm very excited. We're going to carry on with our archaeology in the Bible theme with a visit to the Holy Land. So that's definitely a lot easier to see in your bedroom than try to get there right now, or in your office or sitting room at home. So out of the 3,000 possible sites, I'm going to try to pick just 10 to share with you. That's the same time next week. Anyway, thanks very much for joining me.